Our scripture passage for this morning comes from Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Hear now these words. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration, and was taken while Quirinius was the governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, and who was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Peter Bruegel was one of the old masters of European and Flemish art. He had this work called Numbering at Bethlehem, and his warm brown bourgeois colors combined with wintry white to create this December scene in a Flemish village. If you would walk across this morning, if I had a copy of it here, you'd walk across and look at it, and it looks like an ordinary day in an ordinary Flemish village. There's a butcher preparing a pig for market. There's a woodman struggling with a load of wood. There's children skating and cavorting on a frozen pond. Oh, there is a little Christmas wreath. It's on this table in front of a local hotel. Now, if you look a little more carefully down at the bottom of the painting, stealing across the canvas is an inconspicuous peasant woman riding a donkey. She's accompanied by a stoop-shouldered, bearded man. He's got a saw in his hand. Oh, my goodness. It's Mary and carpenter Joseph coming to town to pay their taxes, and they're easily overlooked. You see, the old masters, they knew best. They understood Emmanuel, God with us, how we trudge past our epiphanies with hardly a shrug of the shoulder. God coming among us, oh yeah, maybe, but not here, not in Bethlehem and not in Asheville. And so the presence shows up right here among us, and here we are thumbing through the evening newspaper, sitting in the darkness, waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Meanwhile, it's best just to work and eat and pay our taxes, right? The old masters knew best. Ordinary day, an ordinary village, and an ordinary inn. What? Yeah, well, why? Because, Bruegel knew the raw material of Christmas includes a hotel. Now, don't picture something belonging to the Hilton or Marriott chain. However, it was very Ashevillean. It was locally owned. Okay. No five-star stuff, though. Well, Ellsworth Callis, who wrote this book, has been something of our guide. We've been doing this series, The Flip Side of Christmas. He said that the hotels of that day, especially in a place like Bethlehem, they'd been pretty simple. They'd be thatched roofs surrounding a central courtyard. And the thatched roofs, under that, it's more like a porch than a room. And people had to bring their own food and cook it in their own pot. And that's the kind of inn that Mary and Joseph came to. Now, why did they? Remember a few weeks ago we talked about it? This was a land of occupation, of taxation. Taxes, taxes, taxes. There had been a bridge tax and a road tax, and there had been market tax. And now we got a census tax. Everybody. And so they're on the road because they're going to have to go back to David's place, home of lineage. Now think about it. It was a 90-mile journey on foot and donkey. They get there, and this is the only game in town. They're tired. Mary's very pregnant. Think what it must have sounded like when the innkeeper said, "Come on, you know this is census season. You're asking for a room. We've been filled up since 10 o'clock this morning." And so they end up in a manger. Oh, we have surrounded the manger with a lot of poetry, strip it down to the prose, and it's just the overflow space, the backyard of this crowded inn. Ellsworth Callis, I like what he said. He said, it makes me glad that Christmas came to a hotel. He said, because if Christmas wasn't inclusive enough to include something like a hotel, then so many of the raw material and experiences of our life, they would be beyond the realm of God's concern and redemption. So Christmas came to a hotel. What's a hotel? Well, this hotel was very likely, for many people, it was kind of a sad and lonely place. Now, Grove Park Inn's not sad. If you went over there this afternoon, people there, they're wanting to be there. That's a destination place. And you walk in there and you're going to feel an air of conviviality and celebration and adventure. But the Inn of Bethlehem, this is just one of those places that you had to stay when you wanted to be somewhere else. People didn't want to be there. I can picture a couple of Roman legionnaires. And they're playing out their 3 years of hard duty in this little neglected country. I can see them playing mumbly peg with their swords out in the courtyard, trying to drown out the emptiness of being 1,000 miles away from home. The travelers like Mary and Joseph, this isn't where they wanted to be. They were here because they've been pushed around, and they felt forlorn about the loss of their sense of homeland, their custom, their religion, swallowed up by occupation. Make it more contemporary. I want you to think about some traveling salesmen you might know, or salespeople. Spend half the time on the road. Ask one of those persons. Hotel? They'll say, 4 walls in a hotel, that's my definition of loneliness. Now there's some people probably here this morning that you may be spending Christmas at home, but because of circumstances, what's happened, what is happening, it's going to be a sad and lonely place. It's not where you want to be. Not this year. See, it's ironic, isn't it, that Christmas surrounds us with so much noise and crowds and action, and for some people, it becomes more and more isolating. For some people, the problem with Christmas is there's so much celebration. It's the celebration gap. It's greater during Advent than any other time of year. As the spirits of some people soar, others diminish. Really, for some people, what is there to celebrate amidst all these signs of consumption and affluence when you're as poor as Job's turkey? What is there to celebrate when you're hearing all these jingles of happy Yuletide songs when you've just lost your job? And what is there to celebrate in hearing a preacher talk about goodwill on earth when you're struggling to overcome the scars of disappointment? I guess for some people there really is nothing to celebrate if Christmas is reserved only for the lucky and the lighthearted. Clarence Forsberg told the story about being in this chapel. Went to this little chapel. It was on Puget Sound outside of Seattle. Beautiful location, a rock promontory looking down over the water. Wonderfully handmade and crafted altar furniture. And he goes in there and he spends some moments of prayer. And as he leaves, he's going to sign the guest register. And so he's flipping through it and see if he recognizes any name. And one entry caught his attention. There was no name, only a date. And this is what it said: "Thank you for giving me a place to cry." In a world of tears, maybe having a place to cry is something to celebrate, if that place celebrates Christmas. I mean the real Christmas, the true Christmas. If anybody's here this morning and Christmas isn't just quite the place you want to be, you're feeling that celebration gap, may you know this: the real Christmas around here is about a God who gets into things, all kind of things, all kind of places, even a sad and lonely hotel. Okay. See, the legacy of Christmas isn't the legacy of undiluted happiness, but indomitable hope. I'm talking about some hope with some muscle to it. I'm talking about the big one, the hope that God is the most real thing in the world, and God can be trusted to show up in stable and hotel the road to Egypt in safety and danger and sorrow and joy and life and death. Christmas isn't about a world that knows no darkness. It's about a people who have walked in darkness and they have seen a true light. I'm glad. I'm glad that first Christmas came to a hotel. A hotel can be a sad and lonely place. But you know, a hotel is also just one of those places where the stuff of life is worked out. I mean, look what's going on in that hotel. It's just people having to play out the necessities and demands of work and daily life. I'm sure there was a merchant there. Maybe his region was from Damascus to Alexandria. What's Bethlehem? What's the inn of Bethlehem to him? It's just another way station. It's another way station on the road to somewhere else. It's just another day of plying one's trade. That's what it was. How about the innkeeper? Talk to the innkeeper. He said, you know what it's like to run a business? Running a business is like being in a forest with a million trees, and each tree is another thing to do. Have you filled the cisterns? Have you swept the courtyard? Any of that sound familiar? A million things to do. Why are Mary and Joseph there? They're not there to celebrate some high and holy religious festival. They're there because the government got them on the road. They have to deal with the responsibility to the government. All right, you know this saying. You know the saying, I bet you can answer it. 2 sure things in life. What? Death and taxes. That's what's being played out here. Just 2 people dealing with the common business of registering to take care of their taxes. What I'm trying to say in this is that the hotel represents the kind of turf that you and I play out a lot of our lives. Most of our days are pedestrian days, pedestrian hours. Every once in a while, there's going to be something else that's going to be punctuating our days. We're going to have some weddings and graduations and maybe job promotions. Our team may win the league bowling trophy. Who knows? Highlights, Most of our days, though, is just caught up in these daily rhythms of necessities of life. And that hotel of Bethlehem is part and parcel of that. And do you hear the good news, though, of that? That's where God is likely to show up. I hope you won't go through Christmas this year without plumbing the full depths of incarnation. Bethlehem is God once and for all blowing up the distinction between the holy and the ordinarily human by showing up in this ordinary place in an ordinary way. God says this is good enough for me. God not only says that, but hallows it by taking part in it, by saying there's no place so earthbound that I cannot be found there. It was about 15 years or so ago, and a group of us from here at Central, I see some of my friends here today that went, saw some last night, and we went to the Holy Land. It was an interesting time to be there. The State Department said to tourists, don't go. But Bob Terrell was something of a cowboy, and he was our leader, and he said, we're going. So we went. And when we got there, we found out there were several places that were going to be off limits. They had been cordoned off. Jericho was one of those, Bethlehem. But we had a Palestinian guide, and he had another idea, and he says, no, we're going to Bethlehem. And so he took our bus, and here we are. All we can see is this embankment that we're going to have to get out of the bus and climb. And we climbed the embankment. Now, we're sneaking in, okay? And we get to the other side, and he's arranged a bus to be on the other side. And the bus takes us downtown Bethlehem. And we got out of the bus, and there was not another tourist in sight. And there it was right in front of us, the Church of the Nativity. Some of you have been there. You've seen it. Historic, beautiful. We walked in, and they start leading you through these a serpentine way, these different halls and passages, and you feel that you're going down to the place that you're being told this could be the very site, the birth of Jesus. And you get there. What do you see? Well, there's no reconstructed first century hotel look, I can tell you that, okay? There was no backyard semblance of the overflow area from the inn. There were some votive lights, all kind of bronze and silver and gold engravings and ecclesiastical hangings. It was beautiful. I'm sure historically, to a great degree, that was an expression of adoration, but I couldn't help, after having that experience, often also thinking, do you think some of those early Christians had a little bit of a hard time accepting God could really have been that much at home in such a humble setting, in such a non-religious setting? And so out of a little bit of embarrassment, they built a beautiful ornate shrine just to kind of cover up the ordinariness of that first Christmas. I think this is a serious matter for us to talk about. It's the compartmentalizing of God. And if we do that, we're going to have an anemic religion that's not going to speak to the full breadth and depth of our experience. Look, the God of Christmas is a this worldly God who's as much at home in the mix and the sounds of a hotel as in the incensed atmosphere of the sanctuary, as much at home in the sweat hours of toil as in the sweet hours of prayer. Here's what I think we assume. I think sometimes we assume that if we could somehow take the routines of our life and change them into something more special, then God could be present. No, the message of Christmas is the opposite of that. Archbishop William Temple used to say, a spiritually minded person differs from a materially minded one, not because he handles different things, but because he handles the same things differently. Oh. God in a hotel, just a sad and lonely place. God in a hotel, a kind of place where you and I live out the ordinary details of life. It's the everywhereness of God. So what's the takeaway for you and me this morning? I think it's pretty simple. And that is the call to be alert and alive and awake and to pay attention to all of it. As we like to say around here, because we believe that every crook and cranny and crevice and corner of life is inhabited by God. Walking from your house to get in the car in the morning, driving your kids to school. It does hold the possibility that in those places you might notice the compelling and haunting presence of God. Do you ever review the dailies? You review the dailies of your life with and before God. Maybe you think back to yesterday morning, you awoke and there was something nudging at you. It was just kind of a new possibility of a way of doing things, of thinking about things. And now you think back about that a day later and you say, I'm not sure that came just from me. It seemed to come from a deep place, someone else. Or maybe during the day you just have another one of those meetings at your workplace. The kind of meetings you have all the time. But there was some act or word of kindness that just percolated to the surface. And it wasn't expected. It wasn't called for. But it was there. And you think back about that a day later and you say, where did that really come from? You see, the more we review, the better we get at recognizing the presence in real time. God in a hotel. God just trudging right over the canvas of our lives. And do we see it? Mel Wheatley, I love the way he summed it up. He said, you know, the point of Christmas is not that if we were more receptive, we would make room for him in a royal suite. No, he said the real point of Christmas is if we were more perceptive, we'd be ready to recognize him as he appears in all the unlikely places. Well, we started with a hotel. I'm going to end with the hotel story. Gerald Kennedy, now deceased, former bishop of the United Methodist Church, speaker, author. He was on a speaking tour in Australia. Now he's come to Sydney, Australia, and he's in his hotel room, and he's doing what I did yesterday, trying to memorize a sermon. He's going over it, and he's thinking about it, and then he starts hearing this violin music, and it's fairly loud. Run after run, arpeggio after arpeggio, and he's a little distracted. And he thinks, you know, I'm not alone. There are other people in the hotel, some other people being disturbed. And he was just about ready to call the front desk and complain. And the maid comes to change the sheets, and she comes in and she says, isn't it wonderful? He says, what do you mean? What's wonderful? He says, what you're hearing. You're calling that wonderful? She says, oh, this is the music of Mr. Menuhin, the great concert violinist, and you're getting to hear him warm up and practice for his concert tonight in the Great Hall of Sydney. And Kennedy was a little transformed by that. Okay. And he listens now with a new ear, you see. And he becomes mesmerized by the runs, by the arpeggios after arpeggios. You know what he did? He took his chair out in the hallway so he could hear it better. And that's where he finished studying his sermon. Okay, folks, this is Christmas week. There's going to be all kind of noise, a lot of it good noise, crowds, a lot of it good crowds, action, good action. I hope you'll have some moments where you take your chair and you put it in a good place. Place where you're ready. Look, listen for the sights and sounds of God among us. God in a hotel. God in Asheville. God right here, right now.